Coordinator for Bruce County Public Library. Today, we are happy to host Clive Card for a special Remembrance Day presentation. Clive is a retired teacher from Blue Water District School Board, and during his career, he fervently believed in the power and effectiveness of learning outside the classroom. After retiring from his last post as principal at the Blue Water Outdoor Education Center, he and his wife Mary, who is also a retired Saugeen District Secondary School French teacher, gleefully accepted an invitation from the history teacher at that time, Erin O'Sullivan, to accompany her and her students on what was to become the first of 4 field trips to Europe in celebration of Canada's role in the World Wars I and II. So today's presentation features the 2018 trip to Sicily and Italy, following in the footsteps of the Canadian soldiers during the Italian campaign in the Second World War. Before we get started, just a couple things to note. Following our introductions, Clive will begin his presentation, and then while listening and watching, we encourage you to submit any questions or comments to our web form on the Bruce County Public Library website, and you should be able to see the link here at the bottom of the screen, or you can send us a comment during the presentation. We have our comments turned on, so if there's anything you'd like to say or a question you'd like to add, please feel free to do so, and we will address these following the presentation. If you don't get a chance to watch us live this morning, the presentation will be recorded and posted here on the library's YouTube channel, so you can watch later and share with friends and family. And remember, while you're watching on the YouTube channel, to hit subscribe. So hello and welcome, Clive.
Good
it's
morning.
Nice to have you here today with us. Thank you for joining us and sharing your stories and photos. When I first saw this presentation, I was lucky enough to see it in person, and I learned so much about the Italian campaign, and I was just over the moon that you're able to share your experiences with us virtually. And the presentation is going to be just as wonderful, I know. So just before I hand it over to you, Clive, I just want to let everybody know who is watching today that because this was a school trip and because of the need to respect privacy, there might be a couple of photos that are blurred out to protect identifying features. There's nothing wrong with the presentation. We did this on purpose. So without further ado, I know you have a lot of pictures to share with us today, Clive, so we'll get started.
Thank you very much, Nancy, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for your kind invitation to be a part of the Bruce County Library Annual Remembrance Day recognition. And to Jeremy, who's in the background, for all your technical support. That is hugely appreciated. My wife, Mary, and I are lucky and very grateful to have been part of Miss O'Sullivan's last 4 senior high school history field trips to Europe. Her vision, her meticulous planning, and attention to detail has changed the lives of all who attended. Firstly, the 95th anniversary trip to Vimy in 2012, then the 70th at Juno Beach in 2014, Greece and Italy in 2016, which we'll refer to later, and the Italian campaign of 2018. As Nancy has mentioned, Mary taught French at SDSS for 30 years, and Erin, although excuse me, recently retired, taught history there for many, many years. Dan Wiegand also chaperoned us on the 2018 trip, and he is currently teaching history at Saugeen District. And all of us are grateful to the Bruce County Legions who have supported these projects over the years by helping get the kids from their community here to Pearson, especially Branch 155 Southampton, 295 Paisley, 383 Tara, and 340 Port Elgin. Excuse me, without your support, it would have been much more complicated to get the kids to Toronto and on a plane. And finally, of course, we are grateful eternally for those who fought and suffered in the world wars and peacekeeping expeditions that are remembered on November the 11th each year. We will remember them. Today is all about the 18 students who studied Canada's role in the liberation of Italy on the 75th anniversary of the invasion of Sicily. And before we start looking at pictures, let's begin with the end in mind. And that is, it's about learning through experience It's about the planning and research that's necessary to get the most out of any trip. And it's about making a personal connection with places and the events and the people involved. It's also about learning as much as we can about ourselves, about others, and some of what it means to be a Canadian. And these trips were absolutely perfect opportunities for that. And it's all in a snapshot of time that includes art and architecture, new places, vistas, fabulous food, time periods, and the cultural habits and highlights that all go with it. So with that in mind, let's get started. So after weighing suitcases, because there always has to be enough room in the suitcase for souvenirs to come home, it's boarding the bus and off we go to Toronto. This is the spring of 2018, and it's still winter in Bruce County. And we board our plane to fly via Munich to Sicily, and the young gentleman in the center is Nancy's son, Jamie, who you will see a few times during this presentation. The bus transportation once throughout Italy was fabulous, large highway coaches that were very comfortable. And we met our tour director, Dario, who was absolutely fabulous, a Sicilian, very proud of his Sicilian heritage. And he introduced us to a number of Sicilian words, the most important of which is granita, which is the Sicilian form of gelato, which is absolutely spectacular ice cream. We get to Catania and check into our hotel. All of the hotels were fabulous. No complaints there. And we got to eat in real Italian restaurants with real pizza ovens that made real pizza, and every meal had a pasta component. They were all different and all totally fabulous and part of the experience. The next day, the Catania Museum is a very unique museum. Not only is it inside, there's a huge attempt to recreate what Catania and the island, the towns on the island of Sicily looked like before wartime. And this street scene is particularly important because here is exactly the same street scene after the Allies bombed after July 9th, 1943. Now the Italians were still hooked up with the Germans at this point. They would not leave the war for another 3 months. So this is the damage caused by Allied bombers. And the museum goes to huge lengths to recreate the experience. This is an underground bomb shelter, which after going through the door that I'm shooting the picture through gets closed. You get to sit on the bench in the pitch dark, and you can hear the Allied planes coming in, you can hear the bombs dropping. And if the room doesn't shake, with each exploding bomb, it's quite a memorable experience. Luckily, those of us who are a little bit claustrophobic knew that the door that you're looking at would eventually open. Canadians, as I said, arrived on July 9th of 1943. You can see this is a picture of the island of Sicily. The Americans arrived on the shores to the southern, more western shore. You can see in blue on the left. And Canadians are pictured their arrival in black, just south of Catania, which is where we were. And the museum is full of all kinds of pictures of that arrival, Canadian forces arriving, unpacking. The name of the operation was Operation Husky, and no detail was left unaddressed, right down to the soldier's guide to Sicily, because of course these boys had never been there before and needed to know as much about the place and the people as possible. The tour guide here was absolutely fabulous. We were able to follow in great detail where the Canadians went, what they did, and some of the stories that surrounded that. And of course, the kids, as you can see, are hooked 100% into every single word that's being said. This map shows particularly the route that the Canadians took from their southern arrival right up through the center of the eastern half of Sicily to where the dot is here, which is the location of Agira, which was a mountaintop occupied by the Germans as an observation post for the entire valley. This poster in the museum celebrates that. The memorial room in the Catania Museum is one of the most distinctive and effective memorials that I have ever seen. It's not a big room, and at one end you can see pictures of war cemeteries from a number of nations. The statue of the lying soldier who is naked with no uniform represents all of the combatants in the conflict. And the whole time that you're in the room, the picture on the screen on the back wall changes, and the names of all of the dead who were involved in the Sicilian campaign. And that would include Canadian, US, British, Italian, and German are being read. Pope John the 23rd, peace is the supreme goal. To forget it is folly. We're on our way to Agira, and this is Mount Etna, which is in the central Sicily. It's still an active volcano. It doesn't rumble very often, but often you will see steam and smoke coming out the top. It hasn't been a threat for a very long time, juxtaposed to the beautiful orange groves in the foreground. And Agira is where the Canadians really cut their teeth on Sicily. On the mountaintop were German, not necessarily defense, but certainly observation posts where they could see what was going on throughout the whole valley, and it had to be taken. This is a closer view. You can see it's not going to be easy. The Canadians had to literally scratch and scrape and climb one stone at a time at night, quietly, as they would do again at Monte Cassino, to achieve the goal, which they finally did, and secured a victory for the Canadians and the Allies. This is a view of Mount Etna from the Canadian War Cemetery in Agira. 485 Canadians rest here. And our visits to these cemeteries are always the same. It's we gather right away at the cenotaph. We sing "O Canada," and we give a reading of the soldiers that we've been given to research, and a minute of silence. Now, just a bit of background on the research that the kids do. Each one of the kids, including the adults, are given a Canadian soldier to research, and using a wide variety of sources, the kids put together a biography that is in the first person, as if it's written by the soldier involved. Those are all read at the cenotaph. A moment of silence is observed, and then we go and find our soldier, and we all have maps. We know exactly where they're located, and we go and visit our soldier. And I would like to share one of those with you today. And this was read by one of our students in memory of Stuart Douglas Robertson of Southampton. And this is what Flynn wrote on the laminated piece that was left at Stuart Douglas Robertson's grave that day. I was born on August 29th, 1917, to John and Luella Robertson, and grew up with my two sisters and one brother on the family farm outside Southampton, Ontario. In October 1941, I was enlisted as a private with the Royal Canadian Regiment in London, Ontario. After almost 2 years of training in Canada and the United Kingdom, we were deployed to Sicily in June 1943. As part of the 1st Canadian Infantry Division, we fought our way north, eventually arriving near the hilltop town of Agira. The Germans were heavily entrenched in this area, and on July 24th, our forces began the assault to drive them out. During the attack, I had the bad luck of being struck in the lower abdomen by a mortar fragment. Despite the best efforts of the 5th Canadian Field Ambulance medics, I died from my injury on July the 25th, just a little over a month before my 26th birthday. Now I lie here in the Agira Cemetery, along with 5 other members of my regiment who died the same day. My name is Stuart Douglas Robertson. Please remember me. As you can imagine, nobody is unmoved, and many are in tears. And what was interesting for us on this particular trip was the reaction of the bus drivers and the tour guides to these Canadian teenagers standing around a war memorial in another country, giving thanks to their fallen for having come to rescue Italy. And the comparisons were made between modern and contemporary Italian youth who would not have any real understanding of any of this, and how much of a shame it was in the eyes of these bus drivers and tour guides who were with us. After a minute of silence, it's off to the cemetery where we find our fallen. And here is a picture of Flynn having a visit with Mr. Robertson. The other Canadians and Bruce County people, actually, who are at this cemetery are Gordon Saunders of Southampton, Henry Catley of Wyerton, and William Steeds of Chesley were also here. And Mary and I actually had a chance to visit with relatives of ours who are here, a Card from Nova Scotia and a Burke from Nova Scotia. So that was very important to us. On our way back to Catania, we stopped and visited a Roman ruin, and this is an 1800-year-old Roman villa that was covered with mud after an earthquake and a mudslide 1800 years ago, in fabulous condition. Here you have the outdoor furnaces that kept the baths warm, and this is a fabulously preserved latrine, which featured not only comfortable seating and beautiful mosaic floors, but running water to make sure that everything was clean and fresh all of the time. All of the floors in the villa are mosaic floors, just like specially designed carpets. This one is a hunting scene, and here is a detail. You can see that the mosaics are, of course, finely cut and colored bits of glass that are intricately laid to tell the story. And the degree of preservation here is absolutely fantastic. The view of the ladies' workout room, of course, it's the serious stuff, and not so serious stuff. We have the Muscovy chariot race, which is also pictured. Roman portraiture using mosaics is exceptionally good. There's no doubt that the person that stood for this particular mosaic looked like that, no doubt at all. And we're off to Palermo, and we're headed through some mountainous territory. But when we get there, it's time to do some shopping. Palermo is on the north west coast of Sicily. We're getting ready to cross to the mainland of Italy, but it's time to get some shopping done. Souvenirs have to be purchased, and the Duomo in Palermo is absolutely incredible and quite unique, particularly by the fact that it has both Moorish and Eastern Orthodox artistic and architectural influences, as you can see from this particular iconography of mother and child. It looks very much like, it looks more Greek Orthodox than it does Roman Catholic. And this, of course, was beautifully explained by our tour guide. Not a word went unlistened to, and everybody is 100% focused to the animation of our tour guide, and they followed every single direction. The original door, and right down to the detail of the mother and child above the door in this very, very old Duomo in Palermo. Also, as part of the shopping, we got to see some of the streetscapes in Palermo. Notice how narrow the street is between these rows of houses. This becomes important at Ortona, and how beautifully kept everything is. Absolutely neat and tidy. A view of the Mediterranean looking north towards Naples. This is from the Duomo patio, and it's later that day that we catch our ferry to head north to Naples. We have to get aboard and get upstairs to find our rooms, and it's an overnight sail to the mainland of Italy. And our first stop, of course, we land in Naples, but we head straight to Monte Cassino, and it's an overnight ferry. And we do get a good sleep because the next day is very, very busy. So we're headed to Monte Cassino, which is in the Liri Valley. Now, the Liri Valley is a very large valley edged by two mountain ranges on each side that stretches from the Adriatic coast to Italy's east, westward to Rome. And the Allies understood very clearly that they were not going to get Rome unless they had control of the Liri Valley. And the Liri Valley, because of its mountainous structure, was a very well fortified German position. And the Allies knew that they had to take those elevated positions before they could even consider heading for Rome. Now, before we get to we finish with our 2018 visit to Cassino, I'm going to take you back to 2016, and I'd like to introduce Charles Mann to you. Charles Mann is from Kincardine, and this is a picture of him taken at Saugeen District Secondary School in 2016. Charles had lived in Kincardine for well over 60 years after the war. He worked there, raised his family there, became involved in the community. He even became mayor, and was very, very interested in helping us get our kids ready for the 2016 trip, which included Monte Cassino. Now, Charles, as a young man, joined the Canadian war effort very early in the war, but in 1942, he decided to volunteer for a very special assignment. In a very unique arrangement, the Canadian and US governments decided to form a joint force called the First Special Services Force, which was created as the first real commando force. The Navy SEALs owe their history to these guys. Charles and his FSSF comrades trained in Montana and were deployed to Italy in July of 1943. The Allies knew they were going to need a force like this if they were going to take the Liri Valley, and they certainly came in handy and did the job they were sent to do. Charles brought equipment with him, he brought stories with him, and he brought a message with him. And sadly, Charles Mann passed in 2017, but his memory is certainly one that we revere, and in great thanks for all that he did to help prepare the kids for 2016 and help us prepare for the kids that we took in 2018. This is the monastery atop Monte Cassino, and you can see that the mountainside is even more treacherous than it was at Agira. This is almost straight up. And to get there by bus, it took a very long time, sidewinding up this mountainside. It would be absolutely impossible to walk up, but they did. The FSSF were called upon to take this. It had been bombed by the time the Canadians got here, and because they thought it was a command post, it wasn't. It was simply an observation post. So the monastery was blown apart, since been rebuilt. And the Devil's Brigade, which is what the SSF became known as, because they always worked at night in black faces, total stealth. They came without anybody hearing them, did what they had to do and leave before the Germans even knew what hit them. And they became known, as I said, the Devil's Brigade. This is a view of Monte Cassino from the Canadian War Cemetery, which we'll get back to in a minute, but you can see how important this would be in controlling the east end of the Leary Valley. As I say, it has been rebuilt and beautifully done. The main door has been reconstructed, and it's a very peaceful, very spiritual place. There's no doubt about it. And when it came to deciding whether or not to rebuild or not, St. Benedict made the decision for them. After the bombing, this was the only thing that was standing, and he has remained uncleaned, and it's just the way it was the day the place was bombed. And he looks out over the beautiful Leary Valley, which this shot includes the Polish cemetery. You can see the valley is quite rough, and although it's wooded now, it wouldn't have been then, but it is very hard to negotiate. And the reason why the Polish cemetery is so important is because of the role that the Polish people played in supporting the Allies. You already know that Polish airmen played a huge role in the victory of in the Battle of Britain as pilots, along with Canadians and other Commonwealth members. The Poles also played an important role in the defeat of the Germans in the Leary Valley as well. And this is a view of their cemetery from one of the balconies in the monastery at the top. The Casino War Cemetery holds 855 Canadians, one of whom is from Bruce County, and we'll meet him in a second. But in 1956, a special wall was built here at Casino to commemorate the 4,000 Commonwealth War dead in the Sicilian and Italian campaigns who have no known grave. And of those 4,000, 192 were Canadian. It's an absolutely beautiful place, exquisitely manicured. Of course, we held our regular ceremony, O Canada, our readings, a moment of silence, and then off. Here's Jamie reading his biography of Peter McCrory, and Jamie's off to visit Peter along with the others. Not far from Casino, the Italian government, through private donations and so on, have transformed a campground into the most unusual museum you've ever seen. And it's simply a collection, beautifully displayed and beautifully organized, of all of the memorabilia of the Allied Italian campaign. Who would have known that Fiat made a Jeep? There are thousands of bits of machinery and trucks and all kinds of interesting things that are here and beautifully displayed. This one of particular interest, one of the few that remain. This is an Italian officer's car, a German officer's car that was made for Rommel and his Afrika Corps. What's unique about this staff car is that it has two engines, one in the front under the spare tire that is not hooked up, and the air-cooled one in the back. Rommel found that sometimes even the air-cooled ones didn't work, so you could take the engine out of the front by undoing 4 bolts, and take the one in the back that isn't working out, put the new one in, and away you go. The company that made these for Rommel's Afrika Korps currently makes Volkswagens. And you can buy one that looks like this in Brasilia today, I believe. Tremendous displays, vividly describing many aspects of the Italian campaign. And we're off to Rome. And this, of course, is the Tiber River with the Vatican in the background. We have, we ate in many venues like this. And you can see the pasta course has been served, and lots of conversation about what happened during the course of the day and what was ready to look forward to tomorrow. And Aaron O'Sullivan on your right, and my wife Mary on the left, enjoying gelato in our very favorite Piazza Navona in Rome. The next day, it's off to Vatican and the Vatican Museum, which has, of course, an absolutely incredible collection of not just ancient, but much more modern art and architectural aspects, statuary, and so on. One of the highlights, of course, is the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican Palace. And this was amazing, and the interpreters did a wonderful job outside the actual chapel of getting us ready for inside, because you can't talk once you get in there. And we're going to take just a second to take a look at Michelangelo's Last Judgment, and there are two important lessons to be learned that I'll share with you. The first lesson is the story of Saint Bartholomew. Now, Saint Bartholomew, as you might remember, was horribly martyred by having his skin removed, and you can see a statue in the Duomo at Milan, and it's a relatively new statue that's there, of the surprisingly alive-looking Saint Bartholomew without his skin. However, Michelangelo's lesson is very, very clear. Once you have faith, you will be restored. Here is Bartholomew sitting at the foot of the throne of God, holding on to his earthly skin, which is no longer required. Lesson number one, he who has faith is renewed. Lesson number two, there was a heck of a ruckus, pun intended, from one of the Pope's ministers, Biagio Cesena, who complained bitterly that there was far too much nudity going on, and that Michelangelo had to be brought to heel around this. Michelangelo's response? Well, in representing the king of the underworld in the bottom right-hand corner of this picture is Minos, the king of the underworld, who is given a face that is identical to that of Biagio Cesena. On this aging old body, which also has donkey ears. Not that Cesena was being a donkey in real life, but that's not the end of it. Take a close look at what the green snake is doing to poor Mr. Cesena. Lesson number two, don't mess with Michelangelo. St. Peter's Basilica, this is the special holy door. It only gets used every 25 years, but when it does, it's to great on great festive occasions, and remains closed the rest of the time. Inside that door is the famous Pietà, which is now behind glass because somebody took a hammer to Madonna's nose a few years ago. Although it's been beautifully repaired, you can't get anywhere near the sculpture right now. What's cool about St. Peter's is the pictorial artwork, among the many things that are cool about it. But not one of these things is a painting. They are all mosaics. And when you consider the tens of thousands of little pieces of colored glass that make up this scenario, close up of the head of Christ, you can see that you can see the little pieces of glass and how meticulously they have been put together to make this incredible image of the face of Christ. The altar, other mosaics, St. Peter's from the outside. The papal apartments are on the top floor on the left. And of course, a picture of the Swiss Guard who wear the same style uniforms they did in 1506 when they first took on the job of protecting the papal apartments and St. Peter's. Then it's off to the Roman Forum. The Roman Forum essentially is downtown ancient Rome. That's where the business took place. It's where the justice courts were. It's where the largest temples were, government houses, and the works. And this is right beside the Colosseum, right here. This is Constantine's Triumphal Arch. We'll refer to Constantine in a minute. The Colosseum itself, which is beautifully preserved, built in the time, in the 1st century AD, for public displays and special ceremonies. And you can see here what would be underneath the floor of the Colosseum. This is where gladiators would have been housed, animals would have been housed, the hallways, the elevators that would bring, and the trapdoors that would allow the animals and people from underneath to get to the main floor. And in the background, you can see the VIP seats. Here's another view of the underneath the underfloor at the Colosseum. The VIP seats would have been coated in travertine marble, and some of that even exists, although most of the marble that would have been taken off this building has been removed for other purposes over its 2,000-year history. In pretty amazing shape, actually. This is the Arch of Titus, and Titus was known mostly for his success in the Jerusalem Wars around 70 AD. There was a bit of a ruckus, which he felt that he had to go and quell. It resulted in the bringing back of many of the Jewish treasures from their synagogues, to the delight of the Roman population, who felt that it was sort of a signal and the symbol of his success. This building originally was a Roman basilica. Now, a basilica is a courthouse. And so the ancient Romans knew very well that this is where judgment took place. So it's not a surprise that when Constantine legalized Christianity in 313, that many of these basilica who were no longer useful who may not have been useful as courts, were transformed into churches. People already understood the finality of judgment, so it was a very convenient shift, and everybody knew where they were located. Here's a bigger picture of the Forum. Again, quite a large area that contained all manner of function, from fresh fruits and vegetables right down to this very special place, which is the House of the Vestal Virgins. Now, the Vestal Virgins were a holy order of women who took vows of chastity, whose only function was to look after the sacred fires. And notice their very simple headgear and robes. It's one of the many holy orders that are believed to have influenced later Christian practice. The temple of Castor and Pollux, in a great display of photographic, being in the right place at the right time. Those of you that are Gemini will appreciate Castor and Pollux. This is called the birthday cake and is a rather gaudy building that was erected in the 1860s to commemorate the unification of Italy. Notes especially the flying of the Italian flag in front and its three colors, which will be referenced later. Dario is with us, and we are on our way to Ortona, which is a town that is up the coast of the on the coast of the Adriatic, which was a very critical spot in this Italian campaign. We have to get there by going through mountains, around mountains, and over mountains to get to the Adriatic coast. And as we approach Ortona, Miss O'Sullivan gives us a bit of a history of what took place there. After Cassino, the Canadians worked their way up the east coast of Italy towards Ortona. The Germans had a strong hold there. There was a huge port, a very significant port in Ortona, which had to be taken. And it was on December the 5th, 1944, that the British handed over the objective of Ortona to the Canadians, who took it very, very seriously. They knew what lay ahead. And although it took 23 days, it also took 2,339 casualties that included 502 deaths. What's also important about the Battle of Ortona towards Christmas of 1944 is that over 1,000 Italian civilians perished in the taking of this town. And the next slide, of course, is back to Jamie. And Jamie is telling us about his great uncle Ernie, who was wounded at Ortona, and subsequent trip back to Canada, where he had a family and I believe has also written a book. And I'm going to pass this over to Nancy, who is going to tell us a little bit more about Great Uncle Ernie.
Okay. So I do have a book here, and it is written with some family members about Great Uncle Ernie's stories. So it's called, I'm not sure if you can hear it, Time to Speak. So it's a Plowboy Remembers from 1942 to 1960. So I just have a passage marked here that specifically pertains to the battle. Okay, so we'll start here, and it talks a lot about, kind of provides some atmosphere. So if you just kind of want to sit back and close your eyes and just let it come over you, you can very much envision what it must have been like to be there at the time. Here we go. So it was a dark, rainy night when we crossed. The rain had melted the snow in the mountains. The Germans blew up storage dams in the mountains, so the river was now a great big one, flowing fast and cold. The Germans had machine guns bursting on the river at different times. When I got near the river, the fellow ahead of me got shot, so I ran around him. I heard later that he was hit in the leg and not seriously wounded. The river was up over my hips, and our shells were falling just ahead of us as we made our beachhead and dug in on the right side of the hill. I was good at digging, so I dug a good, big, deep foxhole for myself and also one for our platoon officer. Everything was quiet for a short time, and then we heard the sound of enemy tanks coming closer and closer. There was nothing we could do but wait, thinking of what they could and had done to slit trenches, drive on top of them, making sharp turns so as to bury you under the ground. The company headquarters were to my left. I didn't know then, but they had tugged by hand a 3-inch mortar. I heard Colonel Kennedy say, "Aim, fire!" Up went a flare. A canvas had been put just ahead of it, so it wouldn't give their position away. The tanks turned, and the noise got dimmer and dimmer. The Germans never knew that we only had that one shell. Our tank could not get across the river. Then for a while, everything was quiet. Now we will be able to rest, I thought. All at once, the enemy started shelling. Shells were falling everywhere around us. That was the start of their attack on us. Colonel Kennedy had 3 companies cross the river, and now he had no choice but to withdraw. He managed to get 2 companies back across the river. Everything was so disorganized, and they lost contact with D Company, so we had to stay put. He knew if we stayed, we would be cut off by the enemy. He didn't want to lose D Company, so he ordered the 2 companies back across the river again, and I'll bet they did some cursing. He asked headquarters for all the help he could possibly get from the tanks and mortars. They really sent in a barrage of shells on the enemy. We also got our share of shells fired on us. We were able to hold our beachhead. By morning, everything was quiet again. The next morning, we advanced a little further and dug a new slit trenches. We were having problems with mud and water in our slit trenches, so for a while, the new ones would be dry. So that is Ernie's experience on that particular night trying to get across the river. It's quite something when you think about it, isn't it?
Nancy, we can't even begin to imagine. In fact, the crossing of the river with its many gullies and places to be fired at, and then eventually Ortona, was described later as Canada's Stalingrad. This was not an easy affair, and one of the most difficult and arduous 4 weeks for Canadians in the war, and certainly in the Italian campaign. Thank you very much for that.
No problem.
Nancy referred to the crossing of the river. This is the memorial to the Canadian Tank Corps that was present at Ortona, that supported the Canadian boys, the 12th Canadian Armored Regiment, and their Athena tank, with the names listed of those that gave their lives in that 4 weeks during the course of the taking of the Morro River Valley and Ortona. Ortona is a very unique situation. The Germans had retreated to the town and had entrenched themselves. There were snipers everywhere. You couldn't be in the street and not seen. And so the Canadians had to develop and what they did was perfect a technique that had been around, but not perfected the way, not to the degree that the Canadians took it to. What they would do is, what they had to do, and perfected beautifully, is they would enter the house on the ground floor, work their way to the top, blast their way through into the top floor or attic of the adjoining house, and then clear it out all the way to the bottom, back to the top to blow a hole through into the next 4th floor or attic, and then clear that one out. You can imagine how long it was going to take to clear the street. And it was not without its dangers, because of course the Germans caught on. They would booby trap the walls, doors, and to make this as difficult as possible, the term became known as mouse holing, and it essentially ended up destroying the village and the small town of Ortona. This is a painting done by wartime artist Charles Comfort, which now hangs in the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa, and is entitled Canadian Armor Passing Through Ortona. And as I referred to earlier, this particular battle became known as Canada's Stalingrad. And if you have any knowledge of what Stalingrad looked like after the Germans were finished with that, you have some idea of the wreckage and the carnage that took place on that battle. Finally, by December 28th, 1944, the Canadians were victorious. Going back to 2016, if I may, we had heard about 2 sisters who lived in their family home adjacent to the piazza in Ortona, who, in order to survive, quite literally, made arrangements with the Canadian soldiers to do their laundry for them. Maria and Francesca Lasorda were young teenage girls at the time, and they did Canadian laundry in and were paid in rations to help their family survive, because food, of course, for the locals was virtually non-existent. And of course, it's rumored that the girls fell in love with Canadians who did not come back to get their shirts and remained single the rest of their lives, bless their hearts. In 2016, we actually got to see Francesca Lasorda, and this is pictured her outside her home in 2016. And it's in the 1990s, the Canadian government erected a new monument in the piazza in Ortona. And it's quite a distinctive monument because it pictures a Canadian fallen soldier being tended to by one of his comrades. And where Francesca and her sister come into play here is that the minute this was the minute this monument was put up and consecrated, she and her sister made sure there were fresh flowers here every single day afterwards. This year, or in 2018, when we arrived, there was an additional plaque at the monument. Francesca and Maria had both passed, and the city, the town fathers erected this particular plaque in commemoration of that, and as a representative of the bond that the residents of Ortona have with Canadians. Note the date at the bottom, which would be exactly the 73rd anniversary of the Canadian victory in their town. The cemetery at Morro River is a very special place. And I will indicate why in a second. We had our ceremony, of course, where we sang our national anthem, read our biographies, had a moment of silence, and we visited our fallen soldiers, 3 of which are from Bruce County: Stuart Tilley from Wyerton, Robert McDougall of Tiverton, and Alfred McLeod from the Chippewas of Nawash. And before I continue, I'm going to point out my poppy, which was made by my daughter, who lives in Iqaluit. She and her husband teach in Nunavut. And this is a homemade sealskin poppy in commemoration for the hundreds and hundreds of Aboriginal men who volunteered and who fought and suffered for Canada in all of Canada's wars. And I'll go back to the War of 1812 as well to include that. So here I am at the tombstone of Alfred McLeod for the Chippewas of Nawash. And you know, you will never forget the first time you enter a Canadian war cemetery. It's uniquely quiet and peaceful, but one is totally overwhelmed with feelings of sadness, loss, but it's tempered with reverence, honor, pride, and of course, gratitude. Huge gratitude. My first was here in 2012, and it was no different in 2018, especially when you find a headstone like this. Gordon Ott of Brantford, Ontario, born 1924, aged 16. These cemeteries are immaculately kept with a huge degree of pride by the landscapers involved. In 2012, we had the pleasure of meeting Francesco with his hat covered with Canadian pins given to him by people from all over the country who had come to Morro to visit the Canadians who were resting there. The local government in recent times has also built a Canadian chapel where you can reflect and give thanks for the Canadians who died here. And you know it's Canadian when you see maple leaves etched onto the main altar. We're on our way back to Rome via Assisi and Florence. Assisi is this incredible monastery on top of a very huge mountain and is in incredible shape. It's quite imposing, beautifully designed, beautifully kept, beautifully decorated, and was just fascinating all around. Check out the ancient Roman Basilica with its new function. You can check the symbol above the door in downtown Assisi. And we get to Florence late that night, and dinner is at the International Culinary School. And what's for supper? Well, fresh pizza, all orchestrated by the kids themselves under the direction of the professional chefs who are teachers at the school. And look at the results. Absolutely fantastic and memorable beyond belief. Next day, we're doing a little sightseeing in Florence. Of course, the Duomo. And this is an unbelievable place to be. You have to get there. Notice the three colors. They have a symbolic meaning. White is faith, green is hope, and red is charity. And you'll recall they're still the colors of the Italian flag. And of course, there's the outdoor statuary, the outside David, who's keeping an eye on the outside Theseus, having just relieved Medusa of her snake covered head. And there's shopping to be had. For almost 1,000 years, Florence has been known as the leather capital of the planet, where you can everything from leather boxes to belts to wallets. It's a shopping extravaganza for sure. But it's back to Rome because we fly out the next day. And we have to say goodbye to the birthday cake. Supper that night was the feature was fresh bruschetta, which we got a chance to see being put together very meticulously by this very proud chef. Very early the next morning, we were up and at the airport at Rome to board our flight via Zurich to Toronto and then eventually home to Bruce County, of course. You know, when you think of our four major objectives I mentioned at the very beginning, learning through experience, the necessary planning and research, making personal connections, and learning about self, others, and what it means to be a Canadian, all four were met by the kids and by Miss O'Sullivan. The kids were on time, well-dressed, they were interested, they were attentive, respectful, and they were the whole community can be very proud of these kids. And it was, again, an ultimate pleasure to travel with Miss O'Sullivan. And we're extremely grateful. Thank you, Nancy. And thank you, Jeremy. There you have it.
Oh my goodness, that was a wonderful presentation. It's just fantastic, and what an experience for you and for those kids to go overseas and see all that. I think, you know, you can read about it in history books and you can go to history class and learn all about the World War II, but being there in person and seeing those tombstones and visiting those places where people actually walked and went is surreal. So thank you for sharing that with us today. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks again for the invitation. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. You had mentioned before, I read the passage from Ernie's book, and I just wanted to share one other little story. When Ernie was overseas, just a few days after the battle at Morro River, he was wounded. He was wounded pretty severely. So he was sent to England to heal. He was sent to the hospital there. While he was in England, he very accidentally met up with his brother, who's actually Jamie's great grandfather, who was he flew in the Lancasters. So it was
Oh,
quite
wow.
yeah, so it was quite a meeting. I think I know in the book it says
Oh,
Alvin was a rear gunner, but I kind of think he was a mid gunner. Um,
oh,
but
gee.
regardless, it frightening. But yeah, they successfully
Very,
completed all
very.
their missions, and he came home in one piece, thank goodness. But I just wanted to share a little bit of a letter here. This was from Ernie. He wrote home about meeting Alvin overseas in England, so he wrote home to their mother. So this is May 21st, 1944. So hello, folks. I just thought I'd drop you the letter today as this is Sunday. Well, I finally got a leave and I went up to Scotland, and there were a couple of hours when some fellows that knew Alvin happened to come up. When they went to book in for a room and they saw my name, as Alvin had told them that he had had a brother in the H&PE regiment. So I believe that's the Hastings and, help me out, Prince Edward
Hastings and Prince Edward County.
County Regiment, right?
Yeah.
So they came up to see me and they asked if I knew Alvin Cool. I was sure surprised when they told me where he is, so I got the next train and came down and saw him. I went out to his camp yesterday afternoon and went to the guard room to find out where he was, so they looked him up for me. He was telling me after he seen me that when the corporal came down and told him that his brother was at the gates, he really didn't know whether to believe him or not. So I guess he was really as surprised as me. Um, as what I was to see him again, as I didn't think he knew that I was back in England again. And this was part of like the mail. From the letters in the book, it looks like the mail was maybe about, it could be as quick as 10 days going back and forth to Canada, but oftentimes I think was quite a bit longer in sending and receiving those letters. So it could be, that he didn't know that his brother had been wounded, had been sent to England. So I was sure glad to see him again, as my mail hadn't been coming in very good. He was able to tell me most of the local news from around home, and was very glad to hear that yous are all feeling fine. We were in town together last night, and I have a room here. It's not so very far from his camp either, and he is coming in again this afternoon as soon as he can get off. We are not stationed very far apart, but I guess if I hadn't have found out from his pals where he was, I might have been a long time finding out where he was at. And I think he looked very good in his uniform. And I knew from my last letter that he was married and that he was saying both his wife and his son are fine. So that was just a little excerpt from Ernie's letter home to his parents, talking about meeting his brother quite accidentally overseas. So quite a chance meeting for them. So that was kind of neat. But yeah, we do actually have
Oh,
this
that
book
would have been
in.
special.
Yeah, we do have it in our
And,
library system, and
oh,
so
cool.
you can take it out with your library card. But it's quite neat because it does share quite a few stories from the war, and the letters home I found really fascinating. He doesn't talk too much, and I believe they were censored, right? So he doesn't talk too much about where they were and specifically what they were doing. It's just you can feel that sense of hunger in his writing about news from home, what's happening at home, and they talk a lot about the farm and the animals and the crops and that sort of thing. So it's quite touching to read them.
One of the really rewarding parts of aspects of all of these trips has been where the kids and the adults have made a connection with a family member that was involved. Now, clearly, great Uncle Ernie is an example, and I referred to a distant cousin of mine from Nova Scotia, and Mary's grandma, a cousin of Mary's from Guysborough County in Nova Scotia. We met here at Agira, but there have been others. Most notably, on our very first trip to Vimy, when we went on the 95th anniversary of Vimy, one of the kids on the trip had a great uncle butler who was buried at the Thalos Cemetery not far from Vimy Ridge. And we found the cemetery. It's tiny. Liam found his uncle, and these connections are they're not just hugely personal and emotional, but they really drill down the fact that you can be, and you can reflect on the connections that you have with these events. And it's one of those subliminal things that seem to come from nowhere during these trips and are just hugely impactful.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a real pleasure to have Jamie step forward and say, hey, I have a great uncle who fought here. Can I talk about him? Yes. Let's do that, because that's one of the reasons you go, right? Is to make that connection.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think too, like taking children at that age, they're quite similar in age to a lot of the young people that went overseas to fight. So there's that connection as well. Putting themselves in somebody else's shoes who's the same age as them. They're enjoying, an experience of a lifetime, but it's nothing like what young people their age were experiencing at another point in time.
The uncle that Liam found at the Thalos Cemetery in France was exactly the same age as Liam's older brother at the time. Mm-hmm. And the first time we met the Ott boy at Morro River, he was younger than 50% of the kids that year and almost all of the kids in 2017.
Yeah.
And that really hits them.
Mm-hmm.
My gosh, he's younger than I am.
Yeah, exactly right. Listen, Clive, I did have a question come in while we were chatting. It's a question from Ken, and he says, "Hi, Clive. Seeing some of the statues made me wonder, did you have a favorite statue that you saw in Italy or anywhere else in your travels?"
Oh, favorite statue.
Mm-hmm.
Gee, no, I can't say that I have. I can't say that I have a favorite. They're all. I mean, in Italy, you're overwhelmed with, and of course, the Vatican Museum is full of them, and the Uffizi in Florence, and so on and so forth. It is absolutely. Some of them are quite moving too. I mean, the death of the Sabine children or the Sabine women and so on are I mean, you can be captivated by them, right down to the expressions on faces. So I can't say that I have a favorite, but because they're all so impressive and from different times and tell different stories, and if you've done a little bit of your homework before you see them in the flesh, so to speak, Bartholomew notwithstanding, then they can really talk to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is amazing, really. The just the artwork, and I like how you said it is quite overwhelming, just the amount, and it's all just so splendid. One more question from Ken. Without being able to land on one, is there a particular region whose art or sculpture connected with you more?
Probably ancient Greece.
Mm-hmm.
My undergrad at university was classical Greek archaeology, so I feel I feel when I see a Myron or a Praxiteles or something like that, or the statuary at Delphi, for example. Oh, maybe there's one. The charioteer at Delphi might be one that might top the list. This is a bronze statue of the charioteer at the sanctuary at Delphi in Greece, which is too spectacular for words, particularly considering that his glass eyeballs are still in place and he's looking at you. Right? So Yeah, I'd have to say classical Greek statuary, perhaps as a genre,
Right.
would be it.
Mm-hmm,
Thanks,
mm-hmm.
Ken. You took me down memory lane.
Fantastic. And thanks, Ken, for those questions. That's great. Well, I think we'll leave it here for today, Clive. Thank you for sharing your time and your travels with us. And I just wanted to note, let us never forget the sacrifices our soldiers have made overseas to ensure the freedoms that we enjoy today. And even though we are not meeting in person to honor all who have served this year, I encourage everyone to take some time on Remembrance Day tomorrow to pause and reflect and remember. A thank you to my coworkers for assisting with the technical details behind the scenes. Jeremy for setting up our tech today, and Stephen for getting all the YouTube streaming arranged. And thank you to everyone here for being with us today. And check back next week. We have another live talk happening highlighting the free financial literacy program offered through United Way Bruce Gray. So thank you again, Clive, and have a great day. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. We will remember them.